I've been extremely excited about testing out the latest version of the Moto G because I think it's the perfect companion Android phone for iPhone users wishing to dabble into the other side, quote unquote. At a mere $179 unlocked, the Moto G is an outstanding value. And yes, there are other Android phones that fall within this price range, but they're usually horrible specs wise, or if they're decent, you're inundated with bloatware. I'm looking at you, Asus Zenfone 2. Now the Moto G is different. Not only is it just really cheap, but it has some decent specs. It has 4G LTE. It has that 13 megapixel shooter. It has water resistance. It has 1 gigabyte of RAM. It has expandable storage. So, I mean, it's a decent phone. But most importantly though, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, it's almost 100% stock Android, and that really is its greatest asset. You're not inundated with all this bloatware. You basically have almost a Nexus-like experience with the Moto G. So that is really awesome. So here's a look at the Moto G unboxed. So it has a 5-inch display with a 720p screen, so you don't get the really insane pixel density of some of the newer flagship phones, but it's decent. It's not going to knock your socks off or anything. Here's the back. This little thing does nothing. It's just an accent. So let's turn it over to the side, and you have your power button there. And you have your volume rocker. Now let's turn it to the top of the phone. And you have a headphone jack and a microphone. And while we're looking at it, while the phone is primarily plastic, notice the metal accent. This side of the phone doesn't have anything. The bottom of the phone has your USB port for charging. And you also have your little notch here to take off the back cover, which we'll show you in a little bit. On the front, you have a front-facing speaker, you have your ambient light sensor, and you have your camera. You also have another front-facing speaker on the bottom of your device. Definitely one of my favorite things about the device. Great front-facing sound. Now let's remove the screen protector plastic from the front of the phone. All right, and we'll remove the little sticker on the back. And now let's pop open the back cover so I can show you what's inside. No user replaceable battery, by the way. But one thing you'll notice is the metal frame inside. So that means it could probably stand up to a fairly moderate amount of physicality. It could probably stand up to the abuse that a child would put it through, for instance. Now inside you have the SIM card slot, you have the micro SD slot, and you have the frame, of course, and that's pretty much it. There really isn't anything else. Like I said, that little thing on the back is just an accent. It doesn't actually do anything outside of the camera, of course. So we'll make sure this is all snapped on. You want to make sure it's snapped on so you get the water resistance. Otherwise, you'll compromise the water resistance rating. Now, Motorola has something called Moto Maker, which basically allows you to design your own Moto G. So you can design the front cover, the back cover, you can design the little metal accent. You can even add a custom case if you want to, which is kind of cool looking. And you can also do some engraving. So I'm going to type my name here and just click apply. Not only that, but you can add an additional 8 gigabytes of flash storage and an additional gigabyte of RAM for only $40. Definitely recommend that if you can swing it. Now you can also customize a greeting that occurs when you first boot your phone up, and you can also customize the wallpaper. So pretty customizable experience here you have with Moto Maker. You can really make your Moto G look exactly like you want it to look from the outside, of course, and also to some degree from a software perspective. Now, one thing I found interesting about the Moto G was that it arrived completely dead, like 0%. So that was interesting. But another thing is that the power adapter is self-contained. So there is no separate piece. It's all one piece. And the cord is really, really long. So it's much longer than a lightning cable. But it's kind of disappointing because you need an extra cable to connect to your computer if you ever want to do that. So keep that in mind. Now, here is what I really love about this phone. It is basically stock Android. Like everything is just pure Android for the most part. There are some Motorola touches here, but it's nothing like you see in Android OEM devices. You don't have like a TouchWiz skin or HTC has their Sense skin. None of that. You don't have to worry about any of that. This is pretty much pure Android, and that's what really makes this device stand out in my opinion. Like you have Google Chrome as your browser, you have Gmail as your email, you have the Google camera as your camera, you have Google Dialer as your dialer. You don't have to fool with a lot of nonsense with this device here. Now, the Moto G isn't going to blow you away by its graphical prowess. Like, it's a very much run-of-the-mill experience when it comes to graphics. You're going to notice here on Ridge Racer Slipstream, it runs, and it runs decently, but you already see it. The frame rate just isn't what you would want to have, generally speaking, from a gaming perspective. It does run games fine, and some may be perfectly fine running the game like this, but it's noticeably laggy when it comes to frame rate when you get into high speeds. And like the iPod Touch, for instance, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but it kills it. The new iPod Touch 6th generation, like, it's not even a contest when it comes to graphics, and that device is only $20 more. So that's something you're going to have to weigh when it comes to your decision making, whether if you're getting a Moto G just to test it out, that's one thing, but if you're getting it for like your primary device, you have to know that the graphics just don't stack up to the iPod Touch, let alone the iPhone 6 or the 6 Plus. So something just to keep in mind. So here are the, you notice everything loaded up fairly quickly for both devices. So the load times are pretty good, but again, you have that 720p screen with not nearly as much pixel density as you do on the iPod Touch. So that could be part of the reason for that. But you can just tell the smoothness just isn't there with the Moto G when it comes to games. Now, let me show you this benchmark here, and I've sped things up a little bit because it took forever on the Moto G, but you can see some of the stats. The devices are fairly similar, fairly comparable from just like on paper, but you can tell immediately that, you know, there's no comparison between these two when it comes to raw power, as you're going to see here. And this benchmark runs really quick on the iPod Touch 6th generation, and that is sort of akin to an iPhone 6. Not quite as powerful, but you can see it just blows it out of the water. It blows the Moto G out of the water. Not even a contest. But the Moto G still runs really well. Like, it's optimized. There's not a lot of bloatware on it. And I think most people are going to be satisfied with it. And here's something that the iPod Touch, or the iPhone for that matter, cannot do, and that is deal with water. So I can literally, obviously you make sure that the the cover is closed, but you can literally just dunk this down in some water, drop it in water, perfectly fine. Because it is IPX7 rated, which means it can handle up to 3 feet of water for up to 30 minutes. Obviously, you don't want to go swimming with this thing or put it in high pressure situations, like where you're spraying water on it with high pressure nozzles and things like that. But it can handle a quick splash, a quick dunk with no problems whatsoever, as long as that back cover is closed and secure. You want to make sure of that, and you should be good. Now, here's something I really want to drill home. This is the Moto G on the right, and you have the Asus Zenfone 2 on the left. Now, this is a really powerful phone, the Zenfone 2. I mean, it's not a flagship, but it's fairly decent specs. But notice the difference between the two. The Zenfone 2 has tons of bloatware, whereas the Moto G is basically just a stock Android device. Not quite, but very, very close to it. The Asus Zenfone, on the other hand, is just loaded to the gills with bloatware. It's just ridiculous, and it slows it down. That's why this Moto G is able to run so efficiently, even though it has a very anemic processor, is because it doesn't have a lot of crap loading it down. And that's why this device is so desirable, because you get a true Android experience with the Moto G. You don't have to pay an arm and a leg to get that Nexus-like experience on the Moto G. Outside of price, definitely the best thing this phone has going for itself. Now let's talk camera. Here is a camera comparison. This is the iPod Touch, this is the iPhone 5S, and here is the Moto G. iPod Touch, iPhone 5S, Moto G. Notice the Moto G isn't as good, even though it's a 13 megapixel shooter, still kind of washed out, doesn't do as good in low light situations. So ladies and gentlemen, that is an overview and review of the Moto G. This is a great device if it's your first Android device, or if you just want to test the waters of Android, or if you already have an iPhone. Obviously you probably do if you're watching this. If you have an iPhone but you want to kind of test out Android, see what it's all about. This is the best way, in my opinion, to do so for cheap. At only $180 to get in the game, you can have a phone that basically has the stock Android experience, has decent specs. It's not going to rock your world or anything, but it has decent specs. It's going to last you for a while because it's well built. It has that water resistance. There's a lot of things going for this phone, but by far, it's the pure Android experience that you can derive from this phone. That is what makes the Moto G so good, and it's why it makes a great second phone if you have an iPhone already. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments section. This is Jeff with iDownload Blog.